Hello, you awesome friends. This is your pal, Edwards here speaking. I was going to say, if you're watching this, you're beautiful and awesome and welcome to my show. Today, we're actually interviewing one of my incredible friends from a beautiful city in Australia called Melbourne. I'm originally from Melbourne, and it's a great place full of winners. Now, here's our self-described marketing nerd. He's a podcasting expert, a podcaster himself, a podcasting producer. He also has a twin brother that stole all his hair, apparently. And you know what? Here's a great guy that has also worked in sales since the age of 18, which I have a lot of respect for. Tim Beanland, how you doing today, Tim?
Doing very well, Ed. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure and really good to be on the other side of the microphone.
Now, I'm going to say it must be weird because I know you are a top interviewer. What's it like being a victim of your own creation?
It's actually an absolute pleasure. Takes a bit of the pressure off asking the questions, and I can just sit here and answer what you have to say. So, no, it's an absolute pleasure being on.
No, and thank you, Tim. And I was just going to say, Tim, we were just having this conversation before. You mentioned before that your twin brother has long hair, and like I was, your hair is receding. And we were talking before about shaving your head after this. What are your views for the world about getting your head shaved?
Yeah, look, I'm pretty positive on that. My last haircut was a number 2, so maybe I can go for a number 1 for you, and we'll go from there. So
we'll get you to a 1, then we'll get you to a 0 next time.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's it.
Tim, I just want to say it's great having you with us. You're quite you're obviously a very serious podcasting guy. I just love to hear from you in simple terms. I know everyone may or may not know what a podcaster is. What do you do and how do you add value to people's lives?
Yeah, so I essentially do that in a number of ways. One, through my own podcast where I interview peak performers in their field. I've interviewed people like Jim Penman from Jim's Mowing, James Whitaker, who wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, The Legacy, which was approved by the Napoleon Hill Foundation, and people like yourself, Ed. So I'll include you in those names. And I pass these stories of peak performers onto people that are listening. So that's what I do with the podcast. But in terms of my business, I help people create a month's worth of content in one short meeting every single month by creating their own podcast.
Yeah, I'm with you. That sounds really good. Now, in simple terms, and I was actually confused on this problem, podcast, because, is a YouTube video a podcast? There seems to be, we have this conversation before, there's this very weird, broad, ambiguous definition to actually what a podcast means. So I thought originally it meant it was for the iPod downloaded from the iStores. What's the origins of the word podcast? Because to be honest with you, I'm not even sure what it means. Can you unpack it for us?
Great question. Well, podcast literally just means audio. So anything that you are doing in an audio format can be seen as a podcast. A mutual friend of ours, Stephen Thomas, I coached him on some podcasting, and he said he's got all this stuff from keynotes, right? And I just said, strip the audio from that and you've got a podcast. Definitely it is to do with audios. But to answer your question on YouTube is a great place for podcasts. People like Joe Rogan, people like H3 Hate have really grown careers on YouTube with their podcasts. So you can still film your episode like what we're doing now, put that up on YouTube, and now you've got another asset and another ability for people to see you. The fact that you can strip the audio out and have it on iTunes and Spotify, that's the podcast element. But you can almost have a vodcast element on YouTube as well. I hope that answers the question.
Because just for the sake of the audience, especially for our younger viewers, because I'm a very old man. I'm a very old guy. I'm handsome, but I'm old. I'll give you that one, right? But very handsome, but very old. Now, an iPod, for the sake of the audience, is way before mobile, even I think before mobile, maybe just when mobile phones came out, an iPod was a device from Apple that was really big that you store music on, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm actually old enough to remember an iPod before the iPhone kind of took over it. Yes, so that's definitely what an iPod did.
And that created the term podcasting, I understood, because in those days, you would put iTunes on your PC or your Mac, you download music off the internet, then you copy it onto your iPod. Hence, the motivational stuff you listen to was a podcast. Is that the right? Am I recalling that correctly?
I'm not actually too sure. It does make sense in terms of the word pod. So, and you could then realize that it's a podcast. So you're casting. I can see where that comes from. But podcasts have been around for a very long time. You know, radio shows have been putting their shows on their websites and calling that a podcast via a RSS feed for a very long time. So I'm not too sure on the origins of that, but it would make sense. I get it. I get why you've gone that way. Yeah.
I probably just made it all up and I'm wrong. But yeah, the other thing I was going to ask you as well is if you're let's say you're an entrepreneur, right, and you want to become an influencer, how does creating your own podcast help you?
A number of ways. The biggest one I see is it helps you build authority. It gives you a space of 30 to 40 minutes where you can either talk about a subject matter in depth with a guest or yourself, and then distribute that throughout your entire social media channels. And the largest ability that's second to that is the content generation machine. I've got a text message from somebody last night who said he's just watched back a podcast and he's found 38 snippets of things within that podcast that he can now chop up and then distribute via his social media and email marketing campaigns. So the content generation machine that one episode gets you is outstanding. So those are the two things. If you're wanting to be an influencer, if you want to be known, one, you got the authority, but two, you've then also got the content to back up that authority as well. So those are the two kind of main things that I see a podcast being able to create you.
Yeah, because just truth be known, you actually inspired me to start podcasting properly about 5 weeks ago, right? Pretty much the start of Corona, you inspired me to do that.
Yeah, and I've been completely impressed by what you've been doing. The speed, the frequency, the ability to upload as well has been really, really quick. You've embodied everything that I tell people to do when it comes to starting a podcast. Is don't overthink it. Find your local network. Find the people you already know. Do interviews with them, especially the people that you respect, and then release them. I don't think I'll ask you, like, have you been doing much post-production editing? You've just kind of been slapping them together and putting them up on Teachable, and because I showed you how to do it on Spotify and iTunes and everything as well. So
yeah, because just on that note, and this is up, and again, I deliberately withheld this from you because I wanted to tell you to get your reaction while it's being recorded. So I was actually going to tell you this, but so long story short, you inspired me maybe about now it was around pre-corona, right? Maybe 5-6 weeks ago. Oh, just for the sake of the audience as well, this audience is being done on the 1st of May, 2020. So Corona's still on, but world's starting to reopen. And God bless our healthcare workers. Got to say big shout out to our healthcare workers. But yeah, no, so what happened was you inspired me to start the whole interview podcasting about 5-6 weeks ago. And I've done about 30 interviews already, right?
Fantastic.
I had one day where I did 4 interviews in a day. And I suppose what I've been doing is, and this is an Edwards ear trait, this is what I'm sort of putting out there. I'm a master at getting stuff out quickly. So I would, like, after we finish this recording, I'm literally going to stick it straight into Camtasia, clean the audio, trim the start and end. I'm going to get straight on Teachable and out there on LinkedIn as quickly as I can. It usually takes me about an hour to get it out. So I do very little post-production other than remove obvious problem areas, start and end and run an audio clean. And yeah, I spit them out very quickly. What are your thoughts on that?
I that's exactly what I did for the first 20 episodes. I do a personalized intro for mine because I want to have the ability to advertise my services as well as hype up the guest on the intro. So that's what I'd be doing in terms of maybe a little bit more production on your end. It does suck because last night it took me about an hour to do an intro because you keep stuffing up and you don't get it quite right. So in terms of speed of production, that does speed it up. But man, I'm incredibly impressed by what you've been doing. Camtasia itself has a really good audio compressor in it. I'm not sure if you've just hit volume leveling and you've put that effect on it.
Actually, I did for the sake of the audience, Tim, actually to backtrack a little bit, so I get asked this all the time. Can you please tell the audience what is Camtasia? How does it work? And what's this volume thing? If you can unpack it for our audience, because I get asked this all the time, and you'll do a better job of explaining it than I do.
Yeah, great. Go on. So there's two bits of software that I use. The first is Adobe Premiere Pro. That's very complicated. There's a bit of a learning curve to that one. Camtasia is a very good editing software for Windows in particular, but I believe it does have a Mac version. It is essentially a video editor, but it's super simple to use. The user experience that you have, it's very easy to chop things and cut things. It has a really good screen record function as well. So if you want to record your screen and send a video to someone like that. But the main thing in terms of a podcast is it has audio compression as well in it, which just improves the sound of your audio. And it's a simple compressor. It doesn't have everything that, something like an Audacity would have. Camtasia is simply an editing software that you can do both video and you can actually edit your audio in it as well. Unlike other things as well, it's a one-time paid thing, about $300 or something, and off you go. Now you've got an editing software that's quite powerful that can do a multitude of things. So, yeah, does that answer the question? Yeah. I hope.
But that's great. Because building on that, what I love about Camtasia, and again for the audience, it's Camtasia. Quick question for that. So for Windows, Camtasia is great. What about Apple, Matt? Do you use Camtasia, or is there a better program for Apple?
Apple has Final Cut,
okay.
which I think is on the computer, or iMovie, which in itself is a pretty good one. I personally haven't used it because I'm a PC user. I enjoy everything Microsoft. And then even Final Cut Pro, which is that's the Mac version of Adobe Premiere Pro. So high-end videographers like myself or like my friends that I know, they use Final Cut Pro because they've got Mac computers. So it all depends on what you have and what you've got access to.
Yeah, because on that note, what I love about Camtasia, again, as an end user of it, what I love about it is it's got audio compression, which for the sake of the audience, what it does is if someone sounds quiet, it makes them louder. If someone's too loud, it makes them a bit quiet. It kind of normalizes the audio. So if you've got I find on a Zoom, if you've got someone who's yelling like me and someone who's quiet, it kind of makes us sound equal.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really important, especially when it comes to a podcast, that compression, the audio, because podcast is audio, it's important that the audio sounds good, funnily enough. So, that's an incredibly important tool to use.
Yeah, and the other thing as I like as well is I also use noise removal. What it does in Camtasia is when you run noise removal. In fact, actually, tell us how it works again. You do a better job of explaining.
Yeah. So noise removal would remove the background noise. So if I had a car just now, because I'm based out in the western suburbs of Melbourne, if I had a car zoom around doing donuts and all the place, or a police or a police car,
or a gang shooting,
or a gang shooting. Maybe not. I haven't heard any so far being out in the west, but. If that happened, I would have the ability with a noise reduction tool to get rid of that noise because it's in the background and it's not focusing on my voice. Now, Adobe would have a lot more advanced settings for me to actually go in and reduce that, which I've done on certain things with high pitches. But as I say, Camtasia has a very basic audio editing software which enables you to reduce that noise. Or, if you had kids in the background screaming, you can reduce that. So
it's funny you say that because to give some context, we've got 2 children. We're all working from. I work from home anyway, but in particular during Corona, we're all working from home. But I have anyway. And what's fascinating about us is the noise removals work so good. We've had 2 little piggies literally. It's just to give some context of how I do it. I'm actually sitting on my bed right now, right? And what I do is I lock the bedroom door. So the piggies can't break in and start terrorizing me, right? Now, what's interesting is I once had them outside the door screaming, and the audio removal, you could not hear them. It was that good, you could not hear them screaming outside the bedroom door.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people, and this comes back to speed and implementation, right? a lot of people would have taken that interview and gone, I can't use it anymore because my kids are screaming in the background. If you can post-produce a little bit by having something like Camtasia and reduce the noise, now you've got a usable audio that you wouldn't otherwise have had. And you've got speed to implementation so you can post it. And a posted interview is better than an interview sitting on your hard drive.
Oh, that is so well said. And so I love it. So I was going to say, when it comes to structuring an interview, how do you recommend people structure an interview to make it work for everyone, make everyone look good?
You're not going to love this answer because it depends. It depends on the type of person that you are. Myself, I've coined the phrase conversation is sparked by genuine curiosity, meaning I will do a little bit of research to understand the guest, the interviewer, who they are. So the episode I did with Jim Penman, for example, one of Australia's largest franchise owners, I listened to a few of their podcasts. I consumed a lot of his Instagram content, what he was talking about, but I didn't actually write down questions that I had prepared. I just knew I was interested in certain things about this guy. So I went into the interview with a curious mind, and that meant that the conversation went in an area that I could take it that was interesting because I wasn't worried about, I need to ask the next question. I need to ask the next question that I'd written down and prepared. I was able to listen to him, listen to cues, and then ask a question deeper rather than preparing and having a structure. Now, that works incredibly well for me. But for somebody who's a little bit more process driven, who likes, who you'll get nervous if you don't have questions, it's a little bit smart to structure certain things, but I wouldn't rely on the questions, because if you just rely on the questions, you're going to have a very robotic interview that really is not interesting. And I've seen it a number of times. I've actually done certain interviews for clients where I've been the interviewer for their podcast, where I've prepared the questions. I just know the difference between a podcast that I've done without prepared questions than a podcast with 20 prepared, and it just sounds like a Q&A that's scripted. Therefore, you get scripted responses. Therefore, the podcast doesn't sound as engaging. And I'm sure you haven't done heaps of research for this one as well. You're going off the first model as well, right?
Yeah, I love what you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's great, and it's funny. The moment you started saying scripted, I just had images in agreement with you. By the way, I had a lot of negative images immediately come into my head. You know how journalists ask gotcha questions?
Yeah.
When you said scripted, I just kept thinking of fake news journalists asking misleading gotcha questions, trying to screw people.
100%. And look, I think sometimes guests ask, oh, can you send me questions? And I think that question is based around that gotcha question. You know, they're scared that I'm going to catch them out. They're scared that I'm going to ask them something like 60 Minutes would, as in a gotcha question. And it's great to actually have the wording for that. I've never had the wording for that. So thank you, Ed. I'll actually take that and use it. As a podcast, I'm not about having gotcha questions. I'm about having questions that actually get a desired result for you. Because at the end of the day, I'm also here in terms of producing content and producing media. I want to ask you questions that make the audience go, wow, so that I can chop it up for you and deliver that to you as a marketable bit of content that we can then use in our social media channels, in our advertising, to sell more product for you based on the interview that we did and the 2-minute clip that we get from that interview.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a difference in comparing, let's say, an awesome podcaster like you to a fake news media journalist, right? Again, not all the journalists. I've got some great friends who are journalists. Big shout out to Sarah Harris, you're a legend. Sarah Harris doesn't watch my videos, but if she does, Sarah, thank you. I love you. But to some, hashtag not all journalists, but some journalists. But I suppose that's different because when you look at the bad journalists compared to a podcaster, you're right. A podcaster is trying to stimulate a conversation to explore something, where I suppose not all, but the fake news media journalist, they're someone who's deliberately trying to ask questions to try and screw their interviewee into some preformed narrative. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, and I'd like to mirror exactly what you said. There's some fantastic journalism and fantastic interviews that has been done, but I do see it sometimes where they try and lead someone into a soundbite that would get them to say something that they can take a little bit out of context, and be screwed, and that's a shame. I believe interviews are a great opportunity for somebody to explain the benefits and features of what they do. So, I guess I would agree with you on those things.
Yeah, and I love what you said before, and I suppose adding to it intent. Like, I suppose what you're saying, so as a podcaster, you've got a genuine intent. Like, you're driven by curiosity to understand a person's point of view and what they think. You're not driven by an agenda to put them in a corner where they say something weird.
Yeah, correct. I based my entire show around genuine curiosity. In fact, behind the poster there, it says conversation is sparked by genuine curiosity. So,
yeah. And just asking for some dark advice here, speaking to the negative for the moment.
Yeah.
And I get asked this a lot, by the way, and I'd love to get your viewpoint. When someone, again, not hashtag not Tim Beanland or Edward Zia, because we're awesome, hashtag not us. But let's say hypothetically someone is being interviewed, be it by a podcaster or by the media. When someone gets asked a loaded question that's clearly screwing them, what's your advice to people how do you encourage people to push back on loaded gotcha questions, or if they feel something weird's coming their way?
I would hark back on my sales days in terms of negotiation, and I would not answer the question straight away. Give a bit of a pause, and then think about what has been asked, and then ask a question back to it. Mm-hmm. I would try and turn the interviewer into the interviewee, and ask a question back to that to get more detail on what they're actually wanting to know. And then if it's something that is blatantly unfair, you can explain in a very concise way why it's unfair. So those are the tactics, those are the things that I would do, is I would really think about the answer that you give rather than shooting from the hip. That's where you get caught out, is if they've got a gotcha question and then the person being interviewed shoots from the hip with an answer, that's where you get wrong. So don't shoot from the hip. Take a bit of time to actually think about what you're going to say.
Oh, I love it. And I suppose that as well comes down to trust between the interviewer and the interviewee, doesn't it?
Definitely.
So for example, we're both friends. No one intentionally is going to try and gotcha either party here. So, and if I do sound like a gotcha question, I don't mean that.
Well, that being said, the interview that you and I did together, I didn't ask any gotcha questions, but I certainly did challenge you on some of your opinions. It was not in a bad way, but I challenged you in terms of curiosity. You were saying there was a lot around the debate of Facebook versus LinkedIn, and I challenged you on that. And that can actually make for a good interview because you were actually able to answer those questions. And you told me at the start of the interview, don't hold back. So I didn't hold back. And those challenging questions actually led to the most entertaining content in that episode, because you were able to explain a concept a little bit deeper than you were originally. So that's another thing to think about.
And I actually agree with you on that one, because to me, my take is there's a difference between, I think challenging for clarification or disagreeing is a good thing. I suppose the two different things. To me, gotcha is trying to steer someone in a predefined direction to screw them. Whereas to me, challenging is actually a good thing because you're actually encouraging the person being interviewed to step up and give more intelligent answers. So I think challenging is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and it actually makes for a really good interview. If you're just a yes man for the whole thing, and I've done interviews where I haven't challenged, and it's not as interesting. It just isn't. So that's why I really love the interview that I did with you, because I was listening back to it and I'm going, oh, I asked Ed for more clarification there. I was a bit of a hard ass on him, but it was being
a hard ass was a good. It created a good product.
Yeah. So there and there is a line. So you got to pick it, but I guess challenging comes to asking one question deeper.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Beautiful, Tim. I got to say, I absolutely love where you're going. I think you're doing an amazing job. And what it was is that just to let the audience know what's happening, I didn't lock the door correctly, and one of the little piggies just broke in, but she looked at me and just walked out. So we'll see how well my sound testing works.
Yeah, that's actually a really good test to see how that. I think we'll struggle with this one. It's quite close, but
the piggies have entered the base. Don't move, Tim. Don't move. We're obviously gonna cut this bit.
You can cut this bit out. So what I'll do to make it easier for you is actually just do a clap for the audio, so you can see. So now what you'll see is free spikes there.
Now, what that clap actually means is a little trick that Tim taught me. Now, just for the sake of the interview, what happened was my two little piggies, who I love so much, actually broke into the room and interrupted our podcast. And you told me about this clapping technique. What's this clapping technique, Tim?
Yeah, so we all are familiar with a clapping board that they use for films and movies. Now, the reason for that is essentially so you can sync up audio and you can sync up the video in post-production. So if you do a clap, what that will do is it'll spike the audio up, so it's an easy point for you to look at on your audio to identify that's where the start point is, or that's where the point is that I need to go to. So for us, there was probably about 2 minutes there of stuff that we need to cut out. So in order to make it easier on your end for that job, I said, Ed, all right, we're going to cut this bit out. Just do a clap so you can tell whereabouts that is. So you'll have to go back a little bit because there was a little bit of, oh no, this is happening. And then I did you to do another clap as well to start, so you know that's where the end of the preamble is. So clapping is an incredibly good technique in terms of editing your audio to make it sync up with the video. But then also, if you've got a mistake or something's happened, you can clap to see where it fixes.
Oh, it's brilliant. And just so you know, again, if someone interrupts your podcast, you just take it easy and you just cut it out. And that's the beauty of Camtasia, isn't it? I can just cut it out after this, can't I?
100%, man, 100%. I've done interviews where the same thing has happened, interviews where lights have turned off, interviews where, things happen. So, yeah, it's definitely a thing.
Oh, Tim, I'm going to say thank you. Just as we wrap things up as well, what are some of your closing thoughts and bits of advice for our wonderful audience, Tim?
Yeah, I would say if you're struggling to get content for your business, something like a podcast is incredibly powerful, especially if you don't feel comfortable in front of the camera. So that would be my tip, because you forget that the camera's there. The second one is, if you're thinking of starting a podcast, don't overcomplicate it. Edward Zia here is a massive example of that. He's pumped out 30 episodes in the matter of 5 weeks. I've published 44 episodes over 2 years. Now, that's because I've done a bit more editing and stuff and whatever, a little bit fancy. I went to finish university as well. But he's pumped out 30 episodes in 5 weeks. That's incredible. So and he didn't overthink it. You had a simple microphone. The third one would be, if you want quality guests, if you want high quality guests, start with your network first. Because if you can build up a show like Edward has, I've got 30 episodes now and 30,000 connections on LinkedIn, you could reach out to some pretty powerful people right now. And I know you have. You've got Brad Burton on the show. You've had Stephen Thomas on this. Well, you'll probably have Stephen Thomas on the show very soon. You could very much reach out to some super high-powered people. But that might not be the strategy that you're going with. It might be a different one. But those will be the 3 things. So 1, content. 2, don't overthink it. 3, if you want guests, get an established podcast and then reach out.
Oh, Tim, so well said. And Tim, I think you've been a great interviewer. It's been awesome. We've even had little piggies call it an airstrike. And I had no idea about the clapping technique. It's brilliant. Tim, how can people get in contact with you?
There's a few ways. LinkedIn, as always, Tim Beanland, Tim Beanland. You can also join my free How to Start a Podcast Facebook group. I'm very active in there. And as a gift to all of the authors, all of the listeners, I've got a free podcasting equipment guide that I can send you. If you want that, my email is tim@beantalking.com. withheld.com.au. So email, LinkedIn, and the Facebook group, How to Start a Podcast, are all the best areas to contact me on.
Tim, I got to say, this has been a stellar interview. It's had its ups, it's had its downs. It's been wonderful. The ups due to you, the downs due to me. It's been awesome. Tim, I just want to say, on behalf of our audience, you've been incredible. And friends, get in contact with Tim Beanland. He's not only brilliant, he's a nice guy you can trust. Tim, thank you for coming on our show, and we appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on.